Good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, of course, I would like to thank all of the organizers of this small event, family-sized event. And so we're very happy to be here to share a little bit of our research on Chinese Buddhism. So as you see, I'm mostly working on the Zutang, which is of course a very famous text here in Korea. Regarding the structure of my talk, I will introduce briefly the text because I understand that some people are not familiar with it. I will give you a brief outline of the study, talking about the primary objectives of my study, the state of the art, and then the core of my study today will be trying to re-examine the textual history of that very important text. And I will focus on 3 studies and share my perspectives on these studies by previous scholars. And there you have their name on the screen here. And then afterwards I will add some additional research and my own conclusions about the textual history of the Zutang, or at least one part of it, as you will see. So, as Professor Kim said, I worked mainly on the Zutang for my PhD dissertation, and so the Zutang is one of the most important texts in terms of Chan, so it belongs to the genre of Chan historiography, but they are traditionally known as Denglu, lamp records. It was originally compiled in the mid-10th century in Quanzhou, Fujian province. The Zutang is the earliest fully extant, multi-branched, as you can see here on this visualization, Chan historiographical work. And so it contains 246 biohagiographies from the 7 Buddhas of the past, the Chan patriarchs, and then up to masters of the early 10th century. It was based on different sources, including biographic records, stele inscriptions, poetic texts, and Chan works that circulated at that time. Despite the fact that the Zutang was lost in China 250 years after its original compilation, the Zutang is really a significant text. Why? Well, first, of course, it was rediscovered as part of the extra-canonical section of the second Goryeo canon, right? And so we know from the last printing phase of the first gen of the first fascicle of the Zutang that it was carved by the branch office of the Great Buddhist Canon Directorate in the year Osa. And this means 1245, okay? And what's important is that this text, the Zutang, in contrast to other texts like the Jing de Chuang Lu, did not undergo revisions by scholar officials of the Song dynasty. And so it preserves many of the original syntactic structures and colloquial expressions of the late Tang and 5 dynasties period. And in terms of paleography as well, it seems that the Goryeo editors preserved many of the variant characters, forms that were used in the original base text that they were using when they prepared the Goryeo edition. So, regarding the main objectives of my study today is to, first to re-examine the Zutang's textual history. And to do this, I focus on 2 stages. First, the original single scroll version, and also its expansion to a 10-gen version. You will see what I'm talking about soon. And so I will try to determine who was involved into the original compilation and the expansion, what was going on, when were the original text compiled, and when was it expanded, where and why. So to do this, I have to first review conclusions by previous scholars. Scholarship is very rich on the Zutang. And the ones that I will consider in particular are those of Arthur Whaley, a British sinologist, Kinugawa Kenji, a Japanese researcher, and Albert Welter, mostly. Jia Jinhua as well, but this is more recent. Albert Welter works at the University of Arizona in the United States. And of course, to this, I had my own research. I will try to examine a little bit some of the contents of the text and then try to see whether there are Song dynasty toponyms or place names, name of rulers and so on that can help us in this respect. And the paleographic analysis for the moment remains limited. This is something that I hope that I can develop, especially for the conference in September, and that I can have more solid evidence by then. So, regarding the state of the art before the 21st century, Despite a few exceptions, such as Arthur Waley that I mentioned, Paul de Miéville, a French scholar, there's really a predominance of Japanese research on the topic. We have very famous scholars such as Yanagida Seizan, Shina Koyu Ishii Shudo. And I don't have the time to go into the details of their individual contributions, but basically their research results are the following. That the Zutang was compiled by two unknown Chan monks, Jing and Yun, and we don't know anything else about them. That the text was prefaced by a certain Wendeng, who is a Chan Buddhist monk from Quanzhou, and was abbot of the Zhaojing monastery at that time. And they also found out that in the first two fascicles of the Zutang, there are editorial notes that identify the present as the 10th year of the Baoda era, and this corresponds to 952. Please remember this date, 952, the presumed date of the original compilation of the text. And to explain the difference between what Wendeng is talking about in his preface, one scroll, and then the text that we have nowadays, which consists of 20 fascicles, where the Shina Koyu and Yanagida Seizan proposed the hypothesis of a long, undivided single scroll, where the characters would have been written in a very small way. And then already as far back as 1979, Shina Koyu proposed attracted our attention on the fact that we should distinguish between the original compilation, which Wendeng himself was reading, and on the other hand, the Goryeo edition that we have nowadays. Maybe that something happened in between, that there were some expansions, some maybe addition of entries for Shillap monk. Okay, so now to the main point of the study, the three major studies that have proposed hypotheses on the expansion of the Zutang. So the first one is a posthumous article by Arthur Waley, which was edited by David Hawkes for Asia Major in 1968. So it's quite old. And what Arthur Waley realized is that there is a passage in Nanyang Huizhong's entry, a very famous Chan master, presumably a disciple of Huineng, the sixth patriarch. And in this passage that you have on the right, he identified a toponym, Guangnan, which he said was only established during the Chunhua era. And this is at the very end of the 10th century. So he said that this Guangnan is a proof that actually the text could not date, this part of Huizhong's entry could not date earlier than the end of the 10th century. And he noticed that in the very same passage, the second thing that you can notice on the right, is that there is a character which should be another one. So the Guang should actually here be Kuang, to guide Liu Bai Zhong, an assembly of 600 disciples. And so the Guang here, he says, is a taboo substitute, Bi Huizi, because of the personal name of Zhao Kuangyin, Song Taizu, so the first emperor of the Song dynasty. So now I did a little bit more research onto this and tried to understand whether these two options are really, whether it is really the case. And so, first to confirm Waley's reading, there are indeed two passages in the Zutang that supports the fact that indeed the Guang here should be Kuang. There are two passages which contain exactly the same phraseology, and in these two cases we have the character Kuang. Waley was aware of the first example, and the second example had already been raised by Kinugawa Kenji as well. Now, the thing is that I looked at the Zutang, the Goryeo woodblock editions that we have, and we really have a lot of occurrence of the character Kuang nonetheless. So, if Kuang in this passage was actually a substitute, a taboo substitute, well, the situation is probably more complex than what Arthur Waley had imagined at that time. And so the situation is as follows. It's a little bit complex, but please bear with me. So the first one is that the Goryeo canon editors probably used a Song Dynasty copy, right? Because we have Song Dynasty taboo characters, presumably. So they must have used the Song Dynasty copy. But then, because we find so many Kuang, as you can see on the right, it means that they restored most of the taboo characters, and this is the normal process. whenever a new edition was made in another dynasty, they would restore the previous taboo characters to the original characters, presumably in that passage. But in this process, by doing so, when they tried to restore all of the taboo characters, they forgot a few, they missed a few. And this is, in Chinese, it's called 回改补进. So they didn't do it for all of these cases. And then another phenomenon that also happens from time to time is called 避讳 hyper, or we can call it 避讳 hyper correction. So this is taking one character which they thought was a taboo substitute, and they replaced it by what they thought was the original character. Okay? And then Kinugawa Kenji, a Japanese researcher, thought that he found such an example in the entry of 大珠会海 in Juan 14 of the Zutang. So in this passage, the 对仇人匡中, he said should be 对仇人广众. Okay, but all of this situation is very complex. We need to assume that there were indeed taboo characters that were restored, but some were left out, and then that we have this 避讳 hypercorrection. And so what if there is actually another more simple solution to this problem? And in 2003, Zhang Meilan, in her 组党及语法研究, proposed that these two characters were actually homophones, near homophones, that they sounded almost the same in Middle Chinese. And so I put some of the reconstruction here by Baxter and Sagar. And so it's more likely that these two characters were actually exchanged, interchanged, due to copyist mistakes, something like that, or lack of attention. And then the example that Kinugawa raised earlier, the 对仇人匡众, is just an illustration of the fact that these characters were sometimes mixed, confused with one another. So the first thing, taboo substitute, is not entirely clear. The second, Guangnan, I'm going to skip a little bit all of the administration thing in the late Tang, in the early Song dynasty. But Guangnan, as an englobing term for the region of Guangzhou and Lingnan, was actually already used before that. Now, of course, we are fortunate enough to have collections of electronic texts, and we can search for these terms very easily. Arthur Whaley in '68, he had to read, of course, through all of the text himself to try to locate examples. And he was only able to read, of course, what was available to him at Cambridge University. But in the Jiu Tang Shu, for instance, we have 4 or 5 examples of military commissioners of Guangnan, and it was completed in 945, which is, of course, before the Zutangji. So the fact that Guangnan appears in the Zutangji is also not a proof of its expansion after 952. So again, there is inconclusive evidence from Huizhong's biography. Now, the second author that I want to focus on is the one who has dedicated his life researching the textual history of the Zutangji, very important researcher. And so he read very closely the prefaces of the Zutangji. We have 2 prefaces, the original by Wendeng and the second for the Goryeo edition. And in the first preface, we learn that Jing and Yun presented their text to Wendeng, and then they compiled it into one scroll, into one juan, entitled it Zutangji. And then in the Goryeo preface of 1245, Kinugawa realized that there is actually a character which had been previous to his publication in 1998, always read as a E, as a 1. And he discovered actually that this character had been damaged on the surface of the woodblock, and that it should be read as 10. And so the passage then, if we understand this, should read as follows. So what Guang Jun says to us in his preface is that the above preface, the one of Wendeng, and the Zutangji in a single juan first made their way to this land, the Goryeo Peninsula, the Korean Peninsula. Thereafter, 10 juan jointly arrived, and diligently relying on this complete version, so the 10 juan version he called the complete version, he just wished to spread the text on a large scale, and so they divided that 10-gen version into a 20-gen version, which is a process which is relatively common in the history of the book, where in subsequent editions they decide to divide the text in another way. Okay, so I just collected the first damaged characters on the first the first printing surface of the Koryo, the extant Koryo woodblock, and you can see that there are a lot of characters that are actually damaged. And then I also collected, I had a look at all of the shi in the first fascicle of the Zutang, and there are actually a lot of characters that look like the one that we have, which is the biggest one that I put on the screen, which occurs in the preface of Huangjun. Right? And you see that there is a faint stroke above. One thing that I would like to draw your attention to is the edition that we have on the right here. And this is the edition which is available on the site of the Dongguk University. And you will tell me, oh, but this shi is very clear. So here you should pay attention because the character has actually been it's been traced by someone else afterwards. And so sometimes we should really pay attention to the kind of edition that we use. This is a later edition, it is for certain. Okay, so Kinugawa three-stage hypothesis. What it is then? First, we have a single-gen version that dates back to 952. Why? Because in the first two fascicles we find these editorial notes, and they tell us that the present is 952. And then we have the 10-gen version, and he proposed that it was expanded somehow, sometime between 952 and 1011. Why 1011? Well, because the Jing de Chuangdonglu, the imperially sanctioned lamp record, was entered the Buddhist canon at that time, and so he thought that it was not really necessary that the Zutangji would be expanded after this date. And then finally we have the 20-gen version, which is the version that we have nowadays, the Koryo edition. So with that discovery, of course, the theory of the long scroll, initial single-gen Zutangji, or undivided scroll, was disproved. So the ones that were held by China and Yanagida, and also taken by Yang Zhengwen in his study on the Chan tradition. Now, Kinugawa also made another discovery, or thought that, at least in Yunnan Wenyan's entry, there is a passage which I put here on the left, on the right-hand side in the table, which relies on a stele inscription for Yunnan. And this stele inscription, he tells us, was only erected in 958. And so this, of course, if this is really the case, if the compilers of the Zutangji relied on Leiyue's inscription, then, of course, this is an evidence of the post-952 expansion. But then I did a little bit more research into that as well, and then I found out that the stele was actually erected in January 959. This is not a big problem, it was just an approximation. But more importantly, that Leiyue, the one who wrote the stele inscription, had presented his text to Liu Sheng, ruler of the Southern Han Dynasty, in June 951, earlier. So this is recorded a little bit in a cryptic way in the text, at the beginning of the text. And Kinugawa told me that in the edition that he had consulted, the beginning of that text was not very clear, so it was not readable, because he had to rely on an old Japanese edition, a photographic edition. But in any case, what is even more important is that Yunman Wenyan's entry into Zutangji does not record his date of death. And so if the compilers of the Zutangji had access to his stele inscription, where his date of death was written, then of course it would be very difficult to explain its absence in our received text. So again, I think that we have inconclusive evidence from Yunman's entry. And then the third study that I want to focus on is that of Albert Welter. So Albert Welter realized that there is an entry that for Nanyue Huairang, one of the disciples of Huineng as well, the sixth patriarch, which records a very long, convoluted story about his auspicious youth, his birth, youth, and early monastic career. And then he observed that all of these events are not recorded in the Jinle in the imperially sanctioned text that dates back from 1004, but that they only reappear later in the Tianshengguangdenglu, which is completed in 1036. And so he said that these events recorded in the Zutang about Huarang actually were added later. And so he thought that he found an evidence again of the expansion of the Zutang after 952, so in the early 11th century, under the influence, he proposed, of the Lingji faction, which descends from Huairang. And I did a little bit more research about that, and I had a look into another very famous Chan Buddhist text, the Baolin Zhuan, that opens the Chan histories tradition. And the 10th Zhuan of the Baolin Zhuan presumably contains entries for Huineng and his disciples, but as you probably know, this is the 10th Zhuan of the Baolin Zhuan, as well as the 9th and other sections of the text, are not extant. They have disappeared, and we don't have any editions of them. But we have surviving quotations of the Baolin Zhuan's 10th Zhuan in 5 later texts. And there is one which is very important. It's the Keitoku Dento Shoroku, which is preserved at Komazawa University Library, and which contains fragments of the Baolin Zhuan's section about Nanyue Huarang. So you have the name of Nanyue Huarang there, and then below that there is a commentary giving more information about about the figure of Huarang. And the first text which is cited, as you can see, is the Baolin Zhuan, Di Shi, which is the 10th Zhuan of the Baolin Zhuan. So fortunately here we have fragments from Nanyue Huarang's entry as preserved in the Baolin Zhuan. And then I compared both. Well, I compared the entry in the Zutangji with that of the Baolin Zhuan, which was compiled in 801. I forgot to mention this. So in 801, the Baolin Zhuan was compiled 150 years before the Zutangji. And actually you can see that there are only minor changes between the version that we have in the Baolin Zhuan and that recorded in the Zutangji. And if we look at another entry to try to confirm this, well, actually I didn't even have to do the research because Shinako, a very important Japanese researcher, had already noted that the entry for a passage, that there is at least a passage, a section of Huineng's entry in the Zutangji, which is inheriting a lot of the peculiarities of the Baolin Zhuan, and which is itself based on the Caoxi Dashi Zhuan. Okay, so Xina already in 1980 had observed that the Zutangji's compilers had used some of the portions of the Baolin Zhuan's 10th Zhuan, which is now lost. And so we know that the Baolin Zhuan contained the mature account for Nanyue Huarang, and that the source of the Zutangji's account for him was actually either based on the Baolin Zhuan or perhaps another text itself based on the Baolin Zhuan. We cannot exclude that possibility. But then again, we don't have clear evidence of expansion. In this case, it's actually a misleading hypothesis. And so, what are the conclusions about the textual history of the Zutangji? Well, first, of course, we need to reconsider the preface of Wendeng. And what do we find in this preface? Well, the first thing that we have to look at is the header of the preface. And the header tells us, 泉州肇清四竹进修禅师文登树. So it's composed by Wendeng, also known as Jinxiu, Chan Master Jinxiu, of the Zhaoqing, abbot of the Zhaoqing Si in Quanzhou. And so there is the name of the Zhaoqing monastery and the Dharma name, which was given to Wendeng at that time, Jinxiu. But we know that he only received this Dharma name in 949. Okay, he was bestowed this Dharma name by the Southern Tang ruler via the recommendation of a local general, Liu Congxiao. But information that we have in the headers of poetic works or Chan histories can also be updated when they were copied afterwards. So the most reliable section of Wendeng's preface is actually what he's himself saying about the text, about what he was reading in the text and when he read it. and where. And so for this, we have to come back again to this passage that says that Jing and Yun presented their text to Wendeng at the Zhaojing monastery. And then, so we know a little bit about the history of the Zhaojing, and Wendeng was abbot there for only 9 months in 944. So this gets a little bit complicated. But so basically what you need to remember is that the text, according to the Zutang according to Wendeng's preface, was either compiled in 944 when he was abbot of the Zhaojing. Okay. There is still another possibility because this monastery was destroyed at the end of 944, and it was rebuilt by Liu Congxiao, but not under the same name. It was known as Nanshan Si at that time, and we do not have evidence that it at some point also became known as Zhaojing Si, but Japanese scholars have raised that possibility, so we cannot exclude it either. And in any case, of course, it was not compiled later than 952. Okay. So about the Tenzhen version now, the tutorial preface says that it originated in China, right? So afterwards, Tenzhen jointly arrived. We have refuted all of the evidence that previous scholars thought they had found about the expansion after 952. And so I began to question, maybe we should just think again about this date 952. Could it possibly correspond to the date not of the original text, but the Tenzhen version, the expanded text? And so to try to test that hypothesis, that theory, I had a look at other stuff in Zutang. And so the latest date which is recorded in the text, in the entries themselves, is the Xinhai year of the Baoda era. And this is 951. And this latest date, we have 5 occurrences of that date. They all occur in the fascicle number 12. And fascicle number 12, if you remember, is part of the expanded text according to Kinugawa's theory. Okay, yes. So the latest date in the editorial notes that we have is 952, as you know. And then, of course, we find a few names of rulers and kingdoms in the Zutang, which seem to have been written from the perspective of someone writing in the 5 dynasties, actually, and not in the early Song dynasty. And so Song Taizu's name, of course, never appears in the text. He's never identified as a Huangdi, as an emperor. And none of the era names are also of the early Northern Song appear in the text. The latest date of a monk recorded is that of Longtan Ruxin, 934. Okay, and for the monks, the Chan monks who died later, actually their dates of death is never recorded in the text. So here, what I would like to propose with regard to these editorial notes that recorded date 952 is to have a look at the same notes in the Jingde Chuangnu, because we find exactly the same phraseology. And then the editorial notes in the Jingde Chuangnu in the first few fascicles says that the text was compiled in the first year of the Jingde era, the Jiachun year. And so this corresponds actually to the completion date of the original text by Dao Yuan, and not an expanded text or whatever. So what I want to say in the end is that it is possible that the Zutang, the Tenzhen version, the expanded version, actually was completed by 952. And so there still needs to be a little bit more research about the different stages of compilation of the Zutang, trying to understand what was the book format of the first edition. For the Tenzhen version, then we still have to make sense of certain entries in Song Dynasty catalogs that tell us that the text was that recorded Zutang in a single gen already by these 2 dates that you have, 1042 and 1161. They still recorded Zutang in 1 gen, so we need to make sense of this. And then for the 20 gen version, we need to understand the table of contents. Was it actually added by for the Koryo edition, or was it inherited from the base text that they were using? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.